This is our ITP presentation. I am Daniel.
I'm Edward.
And for this project, we made a scooter. So originally, we're going to make a kick scooter, which you see, like also known as a razor scooter. We see this a lot on campus. We thought this would be a good object to make because it's a very accessible vehicle and very easy to ride. Anyone can honestly ride it. But the features were a little too simple. So we decided to advance it and make it into a medical device, which is the knee rover or the knee walker or the knee scooter as they call it. And the first four parts I'll go over, and the next four parts Ed will go over. First part I'll go over is the handlebar. Here we see a handlebar. It's very different than what you usually see on campus. You see the three-way grips that I made extra, the brake extrude, so we can place the brake in here, and the little holes so we can extend the handlebar up and down to match the height requirement for that certain person. We use the material AISI 4130 steel, which is a common material for a lot of bike frames and a lot of bars that's used for scooters too. It'll be the most common material that we'll use in this project. The next part we'll go over is the body. So this is what our body looks like. It has the hole here where a screw will go in to make the handlebar stationary and match the height. We'll show you this later in our sub-assembly. This is a basket platform. We'll insert a basket so you can put your stuff and your belongings inside this basket to carry. You don't need a backpack or anything to make it easier for you to ride the actual knee rover. We'll made it to this platform. And here we have the base of the body where we'll put the clamp system and the folding mechanism. Down here. Yep, and this is basically our body. It's made out of the AISI 4130 steel, same as the handlebar, which is the common material used for these metals on frames such as bikes and scooters. Next, we have the fork. Again, this fork looks a little different from what you usually see, such as the handlebar. It was different, and this time we made a fork a lot different. But in the fork, we add an extra footrest system, so when the knee rover is stationary, you can lay your injured leg on this footrest. And we'll obviously put grips later, which we'll show you in the assembly. Here are the cut extrudes for the wheel that Edward makes. We'll just put one here and one on the other side. This portion will go into Edward's frame and be coincident to the body and the folding mechanism. So steering can be cooperative with the handlebar and the fork, which is how we move and point out the direction when we use the knee rover. And this mini cut extrudes for objects to hang and to maintain balance in steering. And we see this mini little feature a lot in the replicas of the forks, which is why it's there. Lastly, I'll go over the handbrake. This is a sketch I made out of a picture. Did the best I can to make complex and very similar to the actual handbrake. Here's the hole where the wire will go through, and here's the cut extrude, so a lever can be used to actually pull the wire and be used as a brake. And this will go on the cut extrude that I made on the handlebar earlier and be placed right there to make it stationary. Now Edward will go through his parts.
So now I'll be going through my parts. The first part that I had was the main frame. This is just like the basic main frame for the knee rover. Looking at this part, this is the front section of the frame, and this is where Daniel would put his body and most of his parts through this hole. there is a central frame right here, and this also has a cut extrude this way. This is where the seat will be placed. I added a cut extrude hole here, just so that, as you can see, you'll see later in the seat frame, but then there is uh, an option where you can adjust the height of the seat. This is just for accessibility purposes. Um, Moving on to the back, I added just an extra part. This is a cup holder that you can just add on the back. This On this back portion, um, there is a cut extrude here. This is where I'll be putting in the rear brake that corresponds to Daniel's front brake on his handle. Um, this back portion for this cut extrude will hold the wheels. And this is basically our main frame. The material that was specified was also AISI 4130 steel, which is similar to Daniel's materials. And this was, as Daniel previously mentioned, just the main type of material that was used, that's usually commonly being used right now for frames and other bike frames. Now moving on to our second part, we have the seat frame. And as I previously mentioned, there is an option where you can adjust the height. So basically, we'll be doing this by inserting a pin into one of these holes, and then you can adjust the height by putting the pin inside the mainframe. This is so that just if you have like an injured knee, it's really hard to adjust the height or like your own height, because there are some people who are short, some people who are tall. So this is just for like to make it more accessible. This bottom portion restrains the seat from coming out of the frame. This top portion I based it off like a lot differently than current knee rover seats. Usually most of the seats are flat, like rectangular, but I based it off of like to make it more look like a shape of a knee, so just so that it's more comfortable. And also this front part here restrains the knee from like going forward or like coming out. The material that was used was 1060 alloy. This is different from the AISI material that was used for the other parts. This was also just because this is the most commonly used material for the seat frame. Now moving on to our third part, we have the rear brake. I based this model just by looking online and looking at a lot of different rear brakes for bikes, because usually knee rovers do not have a brake system. This oval cut extrude here is where I'll be actually placing the brake pad. I made it so that you can adjust the height of the wheel brake pad, so that based on customizability and also just the wheel size. This cut extrude is where I'll be actually inserting a pin or a screw just to hold the rear brake on the frame. And now moving on to our last part, we have the wheel itself. So there are a lot of models that had the wheels, the frames separated from the wheel rubber, but then I made this off of just one whole material, because some of the New Rover models do not use a frame, and this whole wheel is just one whole part. Some of the features I added was just the tracking here, just to add more friction on the surface, just to make it easier for transport. I added a imprint on this side of the wheel, just called New Rover. This hole right here is where we'll actually be placing the pins. And yeah, the material for this part was nylon 610. This is just a common material used for New Rover wheels. Now we'll be moving on to our sub-assemblies.
So what we have here first for its first sub-assembly is our upper assembly. Here, You see some of the sub-assemblies made, such as the grips I put on the handlebar and the basket, and the folding mechanism and the clamps. But right now what the important part is to see the extensibility of the handlebar, which we'll see in this motion study. Yep, and this is basically how the handlebar extends and de-extends. Next we have the body assembly. Here I'll show you how the clamp system works. This was actually a problem because there were so many mates to show a pretty accurate image of this, but this is something very close. As you see here, the clamp goes up and pulls it down, and this is when this can go 90 degrees. And what this does, it locks it in place, but when it's not locked, this can move a 90-degree rotation.
So this is my sub-assembly for the back portion of the frame. As you can see in this motion study here, this just shows the height adjustability, and we didn't insert the screw right now. We'll insert that into the final assembly. This is just to show the motion study of a seat moving back and forth.
Next we have our final assembly. Here everything is put together, all the mini sub-assemblies, like the brake lever for example. But we'll show you some animations. You see the steering working back and forth, how these move together at the same time for direction purposes. We see the body moving back and forth as our 90-degree angle mate to make it for easier transportation. And also you see the handbrake I made here as it gets pulled. It pulls the wire.
You all can see the front wheel, just to see how it rolls. And then you can also see the back wheel. This is just the basic motions of the wheel. Now moving on to the back brake. You can see how just how the back brake corresponds to the front brake, and this applies to the surface of the wheel and it adds friction so that it holds the wheel in place.
Okay. And so the biggest problem we found on this project was actually the wire. I actually went to a couple office hours to Dr. Kim's office to make the wire, but what we couldn't do was perfectly make this concentric and made it coincident to this bar, so when it pulls like a displacement, this is supposed to move along and actually hit the brake. But we couldn't make that to work, which is one of our biggest problems. But what we have here real quick is to show that we have the wire made. What we couldn't find is when we make a spline of the wire, it only moves in the XY direction, which is the biggest problem. So we couldn't do that. But what we did show in our final assembly is that even through out the wire, we can just put it after we create this, but the motions of the back brake and the rear brake, they do work together. And that's the only part. What are some other challenges we face?
Some other challenges we faced were also basically scaling. So so both Daniel and I actually do not own a new Rover ourselves. So all of these measurements, all these features are based off of just online models, looking at them, and so we can't really tell exactly, just because we modified our own new Rover different from other models. So then there were some complications with adjusting the height or just finding the perfect measurements that actually show the comfortability for an actual person riding a new Rover.
So basically, our main problems were finding the wire to mate it to the brake with the mates we know, and also some dimensions because we didn't use the knee rover.
And these are also some of the things that we can improve in the future in terms of the wire and the measurements.
Yeah. And for our future purposes, we wish to make these changes. And also for what we had, we believe this is a good representation of the things we learned in class, very complex and very well made. Thank you, and we hope and we had a great semester.